Hey, everybody. Thanks again for joining us here for another KeeperDAO community call. I'm Kyle, or What's the Deets? I've been hosting these for, wow, I think close to 6 months now. This has been pretty fun. So excited to have you guys all here with us. Today, we're going to be focusing on the coordination game. So our agenda is going to be pretty much where things currently stand and what came out with the announcement from Tuesday. And then we're going to dive into the coordination game's kind of origin story, how it was developed, what went into the thoughts of building it, and who was contributing, and all of the different pieces that we want to look at. And then we're going to look at kind of what's coming up in the near future in terms of development and other things that we'll be excited to share with the community as well. So, really excited to have Jay-Z here, who is our CTO. He's the architect of the coordination game. He's also, the first kind of on-chain market maker through VolleyFire as well. So really excited to have Jay-Z here to come on in, break down, the coordination game and kind of kick this off in the right way. So Jay-Z, why don't you hop up off of mute and how you doing?
Excellent. Thank you. Doing well. Had a great couple of weeks. Really excited about the recent announcement with the status hub for the coordination game. And so I think maybe the first thing, I want to highlight in this discussion would be the status hub, right? Because the coordination game is one of those things that you can't just flick a switch and it's on. You don't just plug it in like a TV. There's a lot of things you have to progress through in a lot of phases, right? And so this is going to be an important document for folks to look at to see, what's new, over the last few days, last few weeks, who's online, that sort of a thing. And we have a massive amount of boxes checked. I think we didn't necessarily do ourselves enough justice checking boxes here. There's definitely a lot more that could have been thrown on here, but from a high level, it shows a lot of things that have been complete, and they're all critical things that are very time consuming. So we're really excited about that. So definitely follow along with the status hub that you can find in Discord to keep up with progress there. And this is really important because it kind of shows the milestones of everything we've done and we're doing, and also what's coming up next in the very near future. And that's just it's fundamental and kind of being a part of the community and getting ready for this thing to launch. So the coordination game itself. So to kind of give a little bit of background. So the coordination game is the protocol and ecosystem that enables automated traders to efficiently and cohesively capture profit while providing a fundamental infrastructure for KeeperDAO and its users, right? So you have bots, which are keepers. They're providing this infrastructure along with infrastructure that we have built. And then users, they have actions that they want to facilitate, they want facilitated rather. And they come on, they maybe place a trade, maybe they place a position, something like that, and then these actions get executed on chain for them, and then any extra value that's extracted from that goes right back in their pocket, and that's kind of like the core of the coordination game. And there's a lot that goes into doing this, right? So from a like a high level perspective, you have keepers who stake Rook to acquire coordination game bidding power. And then these keepers, they search the hiding book for these profit opportunities. And then they place bids with the coordinator asking to spend their staked Rook in exchange for eligibility to execute this and capture any profit that's involved, and then return that back to the user, right? And so the coordinator is preventing bad things like gas auctions, and what they do is the coordinator is balancing what I call upward bid pressure and downward bid pressure in order to maximize value for the ecosystem and make sure it's healthy. Because without that, you could have keepers, being bad towards each other or bad towards users. And so the coordinator, once it collects these bids, it green lights one or more keepers to facilitate the user's action. This could be a trade, a liquidation, or anything else in the future too. And then the green light keeper's bid that was spent over the payment channel is distributed to the participants once the trade has been facilitated and confirmed on chain. And an example of that is you just take the bid and you give the large majority to the user who was involved, and then some of it may get burned, some of it may go to stakers, some of it may go to the treasury. Um, And so keepers, they get to keep 100% of the profit that they capture themselves after the bid, right? So that's how keepers make money, right? And it's important for keepers to make money, because if keepers aren't making money, they won't stay online, right? So we want to kind of balance that, and that's part of KeeperDAO's position here. And then someday in the future, that responsibility could go to the DAO too, is managing that healthy equilibrium, right? And that's a big part of this, is you want to fine tune the coordinator's green light algorithm to have this healthy equilibrium, to say, how much money is going towards users and how much, are keepers getting. And you can adjust all of this by tweaking the upward bid pressure and the downward bid pressure. So if you look in the wild, for example, when you have gas auctions and someone trying to liquidate something, oftentimes tons of money goes to the miners, and nobody gets anything except for the miners. And so that's up to the coordinator to maintain that algorithm. And so there's a lot of key features that are all like live and working today, which is awesome. So these key features include this staking mechanism where keepers can stake their Rook, which is bidding power. So keepers bring their own bot, right? So a keeper who shows up, they write their own code for their own bot, and that kind of acts as like a decentralized mechanism there. Because if say we were distributing bots to all keepers, if there was a problem with that bot, that would be bad, right? So it's actually great to have different keepers with different bots and different trading strategies. Maybe some keepers may trade against centralized exchanges or OTC desks. Others may just use on-chain. Others may use layer 2. So you kind of get all sorts of coverage when you have this bring your own bot mentality. So the coordinator is up and running and doing well. And so that's the mechanism that keepers communicate with. And then the coordinator can also bridge communication to the hiding book to verify things. And so the users only interact with the web page, right? But behind the scenes, the web page is interacting with the hiding book, which is the essentially the whitelisted order book. And then the coordinator and the keepers, they interact together, and they're creating auctions and things. And so let's see. So there's keeper authentication. You want to have a whitelist, and you want to make sure that keepers can add addresses, or if the keeper deploys a new contract, they can kind of whitelist that real quick. So we have that sort of authentication mechanism. We have the whole bidding mechanism. That's all working. We have a reputation mechanism as well, and reputation is important because we want to incentivize good behavior and disincentivize or punish bad behavior, right? And so reputation, just think of it as a way to quantify, a history of actions, or like a ledger of actions from keepers, right? So if a keeper does say 9 good things and 2 bad things, that's okay, right? You may expect them to make mistakes now and then, or have a transaction not mined incorrectly now and then. But if a keeper does 9 bad things and 2 good things, then obviously that reputation should be significantly lower than the other keeper, right? And so an example of a good behavior for a keeper, as far as reputation goes, would be like, say they make a valid bid, they're greenlit, and then they broadcast their transaction, and it does what they said it was supposed to do. An example of a bad behavior would be, say they had a valid bid and they were greenlit, but then they never performed the action that they were supposed to. And then a very, very bad behavior would be, say they performed an action that was unauthorized in some terrible way. That would be a very, very bad behavior. And all of these things can play into, the green light algorithm that determines, who's going to be greenlit, and who's going to get the opportunity to capture this. And then, if a keeper is just gone rogue, then they can just get the ban hammer, and they're no longer able to participate. So one of the core features here is the payment channel. And the payment channel is essentially the payment mechanism between the coordinator and the keeper, and then also between the user and the coordinator. So to give you an example, so when a keeper places a bid on an opportunity, they're placing this bid through the payment channel. And the great thing about the payment channel is this happens off chain, right? And then it can be brought in on chain later, which means this is incredibly gas efficient, right? Because if these transactions were happening on chain for every single transaction, it'd be super expensive. But this brings it off chain and maximizes efficiency. because that's, at the end of the day, that's what users and keepers want, is they want to maximize efficiency, maximize profitability, maximize return and rewards, that sort of thing. And then same thing with a user or a market maker, right? So say if you perform a lot of trades, or maybe a month's worth of trades, or if you're a market maker and you're trading all day long, you may decide to claim your rewards once a week or once a month, and you can claim them as often as you'd like, and you would do that through this payment channel with the coordinator as well. And let's see. So keeper behavior, I mentioned that a little bit with the upward bid pressure, the downward bid pressure, and it's all about finding that equilibrium, which is important, and that's something that we will do as our team initially, and then in the future we may consider kind of handing that over to the DAO. But it's one of those things that requires a lot of expertise to kind of find that equilibrium, to make sure that all the participants are well balanced. And so that's kind of the high level of the coordination game, and then a bit on the status hub there. And so, like, if you guys take a look at the status hub, some key things that are coming up soon would be like the dashboards, for example. Those are going to be great because today Ninja is live trading on our trading app through the coordination game. But once the dashboard is up, you can actually visualize this and see this. And then once other keepers, finally are turned on and they're integrated as well, then you'll get to see, oh, okay, I had an order here and I had, 2 or 3 or 4 keepers bid on it. And this was the one that was secured. This was the reward that was secured for me. And it'll be really exciting to see that once that's live. So I definitely look forward to seeing that dashboard up. And another thing to look forward to the dashboard too would be a way for keepers to optimize their strategy, right? So keepers can use the dashboard to do things like look at an auction that they lost and think, why did I lose this auction? Did I not bid high enough? Or was it just bad luck due to randomness? Or maybe did I not have an integration and this other integration was more valuable? So this dashboard will be critical for keepers as well to monitor their progress and optimize their bots.
Yeah, Joe.
And so I'd say we've got some questions we can get into next, Dietz. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, great intro into kind of where we're at here. We've seen, the amount of work that goes in the status hub. I mean, the amount of boxes that are checked, but still with more work to do. I'm just really excited to see kind of this come to kind of full circle here. But why don't we just kind of bring it way back a little bit? So, before, this was in development, where did this idea even come from?
Yeah, so the coordination game, the concept of it really just comes from observing inefficiencies in the market and on blockchains, right? Because blockchains are not naturally efficient. They kind of are what they are, but then when people start using them and they start deploying bots, then they kind of have these behaviors that just kind of take over. I mean, you end up with all these side effects, and it just naturally makes sense to optimize, right? Because that's kind of what humans do, is they look at things and say, how can I make this better? And coordinating is important, right? And especially when you're talking about a blockchain, you've got this layer, that layer, maybe that blockchain, this blockchain. You have centralized exchanges, which is kind of similar to a layer two. And all of these come into play, and there's things that fall through the crack. There's inefficiencies, and so coordination is all about maximizing efficiency, and that's kind of the origin of this. And then it's just a matter of how do you architect that properly, and that's kind of the rabbit hole that you go down.
For sure. So thinking about some of our previous conversations where you've talked about Volley Fire and your experience as kind of like really the first on-chain market maker. So tell me kind of how that factored in, and tell me about kind of pioneering that on-chain market making.
Yeah, and that's absolutely related to really the origin of this, because when I first observed like the first really usable DEX on chain, there was just zero liquidity. And there were even several DEXs before, and they just, again, they had zero liquidity, but the protocol was just brutal and they just didn't really function properly. And so when I realized that these dexes actually worked and did what they should do, which is securely allow you to swap assets on a blockchain without using a credit card or KYC, anything like that. It just blew my mind, And so looking at the liquidity, it was very clear that this was an inefficiency and a problem, and that this tool could be better with liquidity. And so that's kind of how I went down the rabbit hole of programming and involving dexes, and kind of combining my programming passion with building software and blockchains, just kind of combining it all in one. Um, and so, but what's interesting is when liquidity comes online to these protocols, because the first step is to get liquidity on them, right? And then the second step is just to kind of observe what happens, and what happens is just absolute chaos, right? Because you have humans, trying to snatch up things, you have bots trying to snatch up things, and now all of a sudden, miners are getting involved. Mining pools want to fight over it. Now there's just like free money everywhere. People are just trying to capture, and it's just absolute chaos. Um, and then it's not efficient. It's not naturally efficient at all, right? And so like at the time, like I would kind of optimize my market making strategy to fit the environment, but then I was also playing the flip side where I was writing bots to be the taker as well, to kind of capture profit, whether it's from my market making bot or other users or other market making bots, etc. And other times, my bots would just be battling other bots. It's just crazy, the types of behaviors with bots that you can observe. And it's not necessarily a healthy ecosystem, and especially nowadays with like sandwich attacks and things. It's very common to see over the last 2 years. Bots will actually specifically target sandwich bots. And Nathan obviously was a big pioneer of that sort of a thing. And so it's just really entertaining to see how this goes. And then at the end of the day, the user suffers a lot, and that's really where the coordination game kind of stands out. Is it's kind of for the user and for the market maker. It kind of caters to them to make sure that they have the best experience possible, rather than just getting completely run over by all of this.
For sure. So through your experience on kind of both sides of the transaction, really identified both inefficiencies and kind of ways that it could be improved, which I'm guessing kind of led to, beginning the development of the coordination game. So kind of who had a hand in that with you?
Yeah, so we have a fantastic team. I think it's definitely important to highlight, who's been contributing. Sisterth and I spent a lot of time just talking about like economic design and just tossing around ideas and just high level. A lot of it kind of revolved around like this relationship between the user and the keeper, and like how does this work, and who governs that, and like where's the communication. Um, and there's just a lot of conversation. So he was very helpful in those discussions. And so like what would happen is, I'd like come up with a design, and it would be like pages and pages. And then we'd have a 3 hour conversation, and then I'd go back to the drawing board, come up with a design. We'd have another 3 hour conversation, and then it's just back and forth. So that was extremely helpful. So on the engineering side, Aggie uh, was initially focused on the payment channel design and implementation, which was fantastic. And even writing the coordinator staking contract, and then he kind of expanded to just kind of do all over the coordinator, which is fantastic. And so the coordinator is the piece of software that runs and accepts bids and uses the algorithm to make a decision who gets greenlit. And then obviously it also kind of quarterbacks the payment channel as well. So that's a huge part of it. So he's been very instrumental in getting that off the ground. So Pi and Pangolin, and honestly, our entire web team really has been doing a fantastic job getting a variety of things developed and upgraded, whether it's on the front end, the trading app, et cetera, doing a lot of makeovers and refactors that are going to play very heavily into the coordination game. And they're also working on long-term data storage, dashboards, web apps, et cetera, all which will be used by users, market makers, keepers within the coordination game ecosystem, and that stuff is absolutely critical. Nick has been working on Ninja features and integrations, as well as partner integrations to kind of help get more utility through the coordination game and trading activity. So Tommy and Watts have been fantastic on the visuals and the graphics for the coordination game. So they've been creating graphics that basically portray and represent the coordination game as a whole. And it's awesome because like I'll come up with some like idea, but I don't know how to visualize it or express it, and they'll say, oh, just sketch something up, and I'll just get a piece of paper, sketch something ugly up on on a piece of paper and just take a picture of it and send it to them. And then like 2 days later, they send me this beautiful looking graphic with like colors and icons that has all this awesome stuff on it. It's just fantastic. Those guys are great. And Rama has been doing the designs for UIs, dashboards, apps, and he's killing it there. So it always looks and feels fantastic. Um, so Hazard has been focused a lot on adding value to the ecosystem. Like exploring partnerships. How can we funnel users and liquidity in? How can we get activity now and in the future? Making sure that our products kind of align long term with the coordination game, and vice versa. Because you want the coordination game to also align with the products too. Especially, I guess one example would be the B protocol integration that we recently announced. So he's making sure that they have a full integration pipeline and our products are compatible and everything's going to work together very well. So that's been very important as well. And Dietz, I mean, you've been helping a lot with high level organization, the pilot programs for market makers and keepers, and that's been fantastic. And even assessing the situation of if we onboard this many market makers, how much money do they need, versus what we have available. And how does all that play in, and how long should these programs last? That sort of thing. That's been fantastic. And even like finding market makers has been interesting. So I know Dietz, Troy, you guys have been helping out a lot with that and like researching, contacting them and teeing up calls. It's funny because some market makers don't really want to be found and they just kind of do their own thing when they want to do it, and others do want to be found. Um, and then they all kind of have different needs, and so that's kind of an interesting discussion and conversation. Sometimes you talk to market maker and they need XYZ, and sometimes you talk to another one and it's like ABC, and they're two totally different things. And so you got to just decide how to cater to them and how to see if there's an integration compatibility there.
For sure, for sure. I mean, I think that you hit something on the head right there, which was, you know, people not really wanting to be found, or not wanting to give up trade strategies or anything like that, where there always is that kind of layer of competitive advantage that people want to keep. So it has been an interesting challenge to weigh, as we've got folks getting signed up to participate as well. But really, it's just to kind of recap what you just went through. I mean, it's been such a team effort. We have such talent here, and the team's only growing, and we're really excited. We've got more folks coming in. We've got the research partners that we announced recently as well. It's a really exciting time for especially for me to be a part of this. So I'm really pumped. But kind of transitioning from kind of market makers and trying to find them. What about on the keeper side? So you created Ninja, but like, how did you come across keepers in general in the beginning?
Yeah, so historically, keepers or just bot traders in general kind of hide themselves and just kind of do their own thing, and they don't usually advertise much or ever. Nowadays, though, it is very common to chat and partner with folks in various discords or community forums. For example, like Nathan and I just started chatting in the Curve Discord because we were both working on a Curve integration at the time, and we were solving similar integration challenges. And that tends to be how those relationships start. As far as like as far as like keeper recruiting goes, we kind of have like a small set of keepers right now that we're kind of going live with. And then once things are kind of live, that's when we really kind of want to start advertising and seeking out keepers, and kind of open the floodgates a bit more. But they'd say nowadays, it's best to find them in these various communities that are around. And obviously our keeper community will grow too once we start kind of advertising it a bit more.
Awesome. Um, so like looking at Ninja, I, for me, like I've seen it kind of grow from when we first released the hiding game back in February, almost a year ago now. So kind of tell me more about Ninja. Like what's its kind of full intended use that you can kind of see.
Yeah, so Ninja is very different from the average bot, but I guess it has some kind of different strategies and different goals. But what's interesting is like if you kind of just look at like bot traders as a whole, most of them tend to kind of focus on one specific thing or two specific things. Or somebody might write one bot to do one thing, or maybe they have a second bot to do a second thing. Ninja does many, many things. It has a lot of features and can do a lot of things. Like historically, it's arbitrage, tailgating, front running, obviously hiding game. It also trades in the wild. It can also use flash bots. Now it's integrated with the coordinator, and it has like more than 10 DEX integrations, many, many DEX integrations, and some of them are just turned off just because they're so old. And so, it's interesting because it likes to cast a wider net. But the great thing about the coordination game is it supports any type of keeper, right? So you can just have one specific feature and jump on and be a keeper, and just do that one thing, and that's fine. And that you can be profitable just doing that one thing, or you can do something similar to Ninja where you kind of cast a really, really wide net and try to do all sorts of many things. And so that the coordination game kind of brings all of those things and all of those people together to make an efficient ecosystem, which is great.
So what was kind of the influence on that as you kind of iterated on Ninja? Kind of what helped you kind of land where it is today?
I would say a lot of other bots kind of influenced it, right? Because when you're just viewing on-chain activity, transactions, and monitoring things, and like say a new DEX comes online and you're analyzing the protocol, you just kind of observe inefficiencies and you just observe behaviors and you just decide, hey, something needs to do this because this can capture value, and that's just kind of the direction it goes. And I don't want to necessarily say that it zigs when other people zags, but it makes sure to kind of analyze the ecosystem as a whole. And like if everyone is arbitraging on Uniswap, it's like, yeah, we're going to have a Uniswap integration, but we're also going to have these other 5 things as well, and try to do as much as possible. And I'd say the influence really just comes from like really just reverse engineering other people's bots and just reverse engineering everything you see on chain, and just observing new protocols and thinking, how does this new protocol work with this already existing one? And then you kind of have to think a little bit and say, okay, well, if I add this feature, then I can do this cool thing. And then all of a sudden, a few days later, you see someone else is trying that too. So then you see how they do it. And if they're more gas efficient than you reverse engineer them, figure out how they're doing that, and then apply that to your next build. And it's just this cat and mouse game that just keeps going.
Yeah, it makes me think back to our very first community call where you and Nathan talked about botting and kind of the line that you see, bots or searchers or keepers kind of toe in terms of, what's white hat and what is maybe a little bit more on the black hat side or anything like that. And so you kind of look at, kind of good actors and bad actors. And so, thinking about how you've observe this throughout your time operating, and how that's been, taking those observations and ensuring kind of good actions and preventing bad actions in the coordination game. So how specifically are we going to prevent bad actions and bad actors in the CG?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess you have to think about like what is a bad action and what is a bad actor, because I think there's different ways you could look at that. Because on one hand, you could say like, oh, if somebody is, exploiting a user to make money, well, let's just get them within the ecosystem and they can exploit the user and make money for the user. That's definitely one way to kind of flip that on itself. But if you want to look at people like keepers who are within the ecosystem who are misbehaving, maybe they're doing bad things on purpose, or maybe they're doing bad things on accident 1 out of every 10 times. There's a variety of ways that this can be handled. And so the reputation system is in place for that sort of a thing, right? So the better a keeper is, the more successful a keeper is, the higher the reputation, which ultimately leads to them being greenlit more, which leads to them making more money. So keepers are directly incentivized to behave because they will make more money. So a keeper who is being bad will make less money, and a keeper who does very, very bad things will be blacklisted. Um, and then so you can also let's see, one thought would be like, what if keepers collude, right? That's kind of another thought that people have mentioned in the past. Well, if you collude within the coordination game ecosystem, what's great is we are running our own bot Ninja, which is essentially acting as a backstop, right? Because if you're trying to collude and bid like 1 cent in order to capture $1,000 profit, like Ninja's going to outbid you and you're never going to win, right? You have to at least bid respectable. But again, this goes back to the algorithm that decides, who gets to win based on the bid, and that kind of also prevents the opposite being true. If everyone's just bidding the max, then someone who bids less can still realistically win based on the algorithm. People who are colluding from within the ecosystem, they're backstopped by Ninja. But then also, the more keepers you have within the ecosystem, the more competition there is, the less likely that is ever to even happen, right? Because if you only have, say, 2 keepers in the ecosystem, they could both, in theory, collude. Obviously, if with Ninja they're backstopping, it doesn't make sense. But if there's, say, 20 keepers in the ecosystem, at that point, you don't even necessarily need to rely on Ninja to backstop, just because there's so many people. It's really, really unlikely that all 20 are going to collude. And if they do, again, Ninja's there to backstop. For as far as like a grim trigger goes, like the example I would give is, say there's $1,000 profit opportunity. If all keepers were to bid $1,000, that would mean there's no more profit for keepers at all. All it really takes is one keeper to bid less to make money in the long run, because of the downward bid pressure that's applied. And I'll be updating the docs really soon to kind of explain that a bit more. And the downward bid pressure is what prevents things like grim triggers and gas auctions, to make sure that keepers stay profitable and can't grim trigger.
Awesome. Um, you know, we'll get to community calls, but I did just see one that's right on this topic, which was, is there any concern for a keeper to kind of dominate the coordination game, or to absorb more transactions than others? Is that an actual concern?
That's a good question, because to some degree, it's really not a concern. Like if there's a keeper who's just doing that well, then I'd say it's not a huge concern. Mainly because that's good. I mean, if he's doing well, that's good, and if he's winning a lot, that's good. If he's doing well, he's also kind of laying out the blueprint for other keepers to copy him, right? And so all they would really need to do is, look at the dashboard and say, okay, well, what is this person doing better than me? And just kind of, reverse engineer based on the feedback. Well, okay, he's bidding higher than me. Well, how is he able to pull that off? And then you could just kind of look at the information, say, okay, oh, his contract is more gas efficient than mine. And then, you could just kind of reverse engineer his gas efficiency, for example. Or maybe another thing is, let's say Uniswap v4 comes out next month. Maybe he's integrated with Uniswap v4 and you're only on Uniswap v3, and you can see all his trades are going through v4. Oh, okay, that's why. So I need to add Uniswap v4 to my integration funnel. Or who knows, maybe he's integrating with Coinbase, and maybe the best prices on Coinbase, same sort of thing. So you kind of have to do a bit of discovery that way. And when you have a lot of keepers in the ecosystem, they can kind of naturally find these things. But what's also great is, we're not just gonna force keepers to discover this all themselves. We would like to build some kind of I want to call it like a service, but maybe just like a mechanism within our web app that allows keepers to just kind of do a analysis for them, right? And so rather than them having to dig through all of this information, wouldn't it be great if they could just click on something and it just makes suggestions? Here's why we believe you lost this auction. Here's what you can do to win this auction better next time. And it can just look over the auction data and say, hey, you should bid higher, or hey, you should gas up. Your transactions are on average using 50K more gas than this other keeper. Things like that. And there's a lot of things we can do to kind of help out keepers in this sort of situation.
Awesome. Yeah. So kind of circling back to, development and, kind of what, let's just say the unchecked boxes on the status hub. What are the biggest key components of development left?
Yeah, so right now, we're playing a bit of a waiting game with audits. We have already gotten some feedback from audits, and we're kind of going back and forth, but we're also doing this with a couple of auditing firms as well. So once that feedback is kind of finalized, and we will be redeploying the contract And that's a big step, because then this is the final contract that we're actually going to be launching with, as opposed to the one now, which is kind of like staging. It's kind of like the mainnet staging contract. And other than that, the dashboards are critical, right? So the dashboards are currently under development, and the APIs for the dashboards are working well. And the dashboard is critical because this is where you can view analytics. You can see the value that's captured. You can see all the Rook that's getting burned. You can see details of auctions, and look and see like, hey, 5 keepers bid on this. That's really cool. Or hey, only 1 keeper bid on this. I wonder why. Maybe this was like a really unique token or a really unique path. And then other keepers can kind of look at that and say, well, I should integrate with that, or I should list that token, that sort of a thing. Um, and there's all sorts of feedback that can be drawn from that. And you can see the distribution of staked Rook by the keepers. And you can see things like the yield that's generated on the X Rook pool, through the value that's being distributed here. I mentioned that service that we can build to kind of help keepers and analyze their auctions and make suggestions. That's a really good one too.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm really excited. Like, I know, Pi and Penguin are iterating really hard on this, and this is, coming together really well. So I'm really excited to see these dashboards and see things going. But, looking at, the rest of the list, talk a little bit about folks integrating with us, keepers, market makers, and kind of what we can do in assisting folks as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a variety of keepers and market makers integrating with us. The biggest thing that I'd say I spend time on and helping them with would be um, getting them proper documentation. And when they ask a really good question, I think, oh, okay, this is I don't have anywhere where this is documented, and make sure to kind of get that outlined and get this streamlined. Um, and so keepers, the first step for keepers is integrating with the trading protocol itself, which today is the 0xv4 RFQ protocol. And soon we'll be actually launching our own that is way more efficient and more ideally used for this use case. But so that's the first step, is getting that protocol integration. And then the second step is integrating their bot with the coordinator to essentially make the bid, wait for the green light, and then broadcast the transaction. And so that's a big milestone once they do that, because that means they're online and they can actually execute their trades through the coordinator, which is really, really cool. And so, one of the things that I'm doing this week is, since Ninja is now live, actually bidding, on the coordinator and transacting on the coordinator, is I'm updating those docs to make sure that any little learning bit that I discovered through that integration process gets put in the docs, so that everybody can have that information. And we've got open lines of communication with them, and market makers as well, right? So their integration is much simpler for a market maker, because ideally, a market maker would already have a market making platform built, whether they made it or they're operating one from somewhere. And so at the end of the day, assuming a market maker already has this market making operation, they're simply integrating their hot wallets with the hiding book, and submitting bids and asks. And so, we sometimes get questions about like, oh, hey, I'm having trouble designing logic. And so we kind of help them out with that. Other times it's maybe a question about, a rate limit or something like that, or maybe a question about what's the most optimal canceling strategy, that sort of thing. So I think there's also a lot of value here in talking strategy too. And so that's something that we would like to do, is help folks, because we want to help market makers be profitable and help kind of share strategies to make sure that they're market making and making money. And same with keepers. So I think sharing technological integration insights is helpful, but then also just sharing strategy is really helpful as well.
Awesome. So I think that the key thing that I want to hit on is that folks are currently integrating, and we're really excited to, as things get going and we continue to check off boxes on the status hub, and we're about ready to have this be kind of fully revealed, fully live. the big thing that I'm really excited about is this pilot program of, kind of really bootstrapping, the early phase of the coordination game. And so looking at it from the market maker side, we have a few market makers already integrating and looking to participate. But, if you're out there as a current market maker now, considering this and looking for, ways that maybe you want to increase your profitability, or you are looking to, explore new avenues of generating profit for yourself, I think this pilot program, it has got a lot of legs. So if you look at it as a market maker, tell me about, what they're doing right now and how that differs for participating in the pilot program.
Yeah, and so that last part about your question. So when you say what they're doing right now, do you mean like elsewhere, or do you mean right now, as in
Yeah. So
before the pilot program starts?
yeah. So right now, before the pilot program starts, if you're a market maker on chain, tell me
Mhm.
what that life is like, and then tell
Right.
me why it would improve with the coordination game in the
Yeah.
pilot program.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. Great question. So, market makers, they get paid a couple different ways, right? So, um, the hardest way to make money as a market maker is to actually make money capturing a spread, because spreads tend to be tight, and competition tends to be stiff, right? The easiest way for a market maker to get paid is to provide a liquidity service. They say you go somewhere, and they say, hey, we need this much liquidity on our order books, and we'll pay you this much a month to do it. And so a lot of market makers, they kind of chase those service deals and those service contracts. And that's definitely a great way to make money. And now some market makers are very good at capturing spreads, even when you think there really isn't much to be had there. And others kind of struggle with that. And this kind of goes back and forth. So what's great about being a market maker on chain for KeeperDAO with the coordination game, and then especially with this pilot program, is you'll actually end up with three different ways to make money, right? And so the first way to make money is to just, again, capture spread and try to make money capturing spread, or you could potentially hedge against something else, right? So if your order's filled, you could try to hedge it against, some other service somewhere else. Another way to make money is to get your Rook rewards from any MEV that's extracted, right, and handed back to you by the keeper, which is awesome. Because if you just go market make on an open order book today outside of KeeperDAO, you're not getting any MEV returns, right? So if someone buys your ether for $3,000, that's it. That's all you get. You don't get any MEV. But within the KeeperDAO ecosystem, you do. You get that right back. And then the third way to make money with this pilot program now is the weekly competition pool, which is awesome. And so that's kind of like this essentially, think of it as like an investment to get them integrated and on board in the short term and making money in the short term. And then now that they're here, they're going to be market making, providing a service, generating volume, creating those spreads, adding a lot of tight liquidity to our KeeperDAO ecosystem. And now they're going to be capturing their own MEV without them having to do any of the work, because the keeper's doing all the work. And that's kind of their long-term stickiness, is that MEV return that's just constantly going into their pocket. And then as the ecosystem grows and matures, we have integration partners like B Protocol, for example. Now their orders are just crossing with everything, and it's super high value, right? Because a market maker could just make one integration from their hot wallet to the KeeperDAO ecosystem. And that integration is the hiding book, right? Just make that one integration, and now they're integrated with all decentralized exchanges that any keeper is integrated with. They're also integrated with any centralized exchanges that any keeper is integrated with, and any sort of liquidation protocols that may be integrated with, like say the B protocol integration, for example. So they just all just kind of get connected, and it's super simple for a market maker to do this, and it's very high value in the short term, from the pilot program, and then also in the long term, just from everything that's kind of coming down the funnel.
Awesome. Really, really great example. And if you're looking and considering this and need to ask some more questions, or if you just want to, like, hey, how do I get this integration started or anything, we've got great documentation on market maker integrations, and you can just send me Jay-Z, Hazard, Troy, pretty much any team member, get in touch with us, and we can work with you to help get you integrated and get you going. We're kind of low on slots for the pilot program, but we're not turning anyone away just yet. So reach out to us. We're excited to work with you. But Joey, I think we're at a point though. Why don't we start answering some of the questions that we got ahead of time? And if we have some extra time at the end, we'll grab some stuff from the audience here.
Excellent.
So the first two questions that we got, kind of a little bit of the same. Talking about coordination games, kind of competitive edge, or the differences between us and other folks. What is the competition for the coordination game right now?
Yeah, great question. So there currently is no competition to the coordination game. There are different products that do different things and have different goals. Um, some of them are actually usable within our ecosystem. For example, Flashbots is a tool that can be used by keepers within the coordination game. So it's not a competitor. But if you use Flashbots, you can't necessarily coordinate, and pretty much all the value is bleeding towards the miners at that point. So the user doesn't get rewarded there. So it's just kind of very different. But so I guess comparing KeeperDAO to other products and other ecosystems will be a lot easier to do in the future. Once our dashboards are live and you can kind of see activity and understand it better. I'm going to kind of hold off on comparing it to competitors today, just until the community can kind of see it, interact with it, use it, actually look at the dashboard, get a better understanding that way. So maybe let's kind of save the bulk of this question for later. But I guess the first part of it is like, how do you give the coordination game a moat, and kind of like how do you maintain it and protect it from competitors? That's really all about like the ecosystem stickiness that we're creating. Right. I mean, we have a lot of proprietary IP that's not open source Solidity code. This is absolutely not the case where like a sushi swap can just fork Uniswap, right? Because we're more than a Solidity contract. There's a lot of infrastructure behind the scenes that goes into this, including our algorithms and things. But really, it's all about like the network participants too. Is we want to attract keepers, the market makers, users, and make products, and then of course, our protocol upgrade that we'll be putting out will be kind of helping with all of that. So it's really important to kind of keep all of those things healthy, and make sure to stay ahead of the competition that way.
Awesome, for sure. Here's the next question I got. What was the most challenging part of building the coordination game?
So that's a great question too. So really, initially, it was getting the economics right. You want economics to benefit users, and you also want to enable keepers to work for those users and have that economic relationship between them be as healthy as possible. And there's a lot of ways, like if you really break it down, there's a lot of ways you can do that, and there's a lot of pros and cons. And so it's really it took a lot of design iterating in order to get those economics down. And then really, once you have that nailed down, then it's just a lot of engineering and complex architecture in order to pull it off. So this is not just again, this isn't like a simple smart contract. There's just a lot of complexities to it. When you're talking about coordinating different pieces of software written by different people, there's a lot that goes into it for sure.
Awesome. So an interesting question that we got here. CG seems dependent on both the hiding book and keepers. So is the success of the coordination game and popularity tied or bottlenecked by the hiding book usage?
Good question. So the hiding book the hiding book itself is a short and medium term solution. So in the future, I'd actually like to move the hiding book to a layer 2 at some point. So as far as like architectural bottleneck, there's really no bottleneck there. But I guess maybe the last part of the question is probably more, I think, what you were getting at there. So popularity and usage, I think you mentioned. So yes. So if there isn't any volume, or if there aren't any orders going through the hiding book, then that does bottleneck it. But that's where we're focused on attracting, market makers, attracting users, making sure the protocol is as efficient as possible, aka our protocol upgrade, um, and making sure that it can compete and be efficient, and then also attracting as many keepers as you can to specialize in their own avenues to make sure that they're aggressively extracting as much value as possible. That way the user gets the best deal possible and gets all of that extracted value back into their pocket. So the ecosystem does rely on kind of all of these things, because if there is no usage to the hiding book, or if there's no one using the hiding book, then that is obviously a big problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand. Here's a question about other chains. So, kind of what's our expectations around supporting other chains or L2s, and what's that process look like?
That's a good question. So I think there's definitely a lot of discussions to be had here. I think I'd like to punt this question for later on down the road once things are live, and you can kind of interact with it more. Because once you kind of see it in action, like especially with like a dashboard, then you can more easily imagine where things are going to go and how things are going to look. But to give you an example, the coordinator does not care where the keeper trades to or from. All the coordinator cares is that that user's action gets facilitated, right? So a keeper could be facilitating that through a layer two. That's totally fine. A coordinator could live on a layer two or could live somewhere else, or a coordinator could be coordinating many different layers or many different blockchains, right? So it's really it's very flexible, but there's also a lot to kind of dive into on this front. So maybe we'll punt this question until after things are live, the dashboard's up, and then we can kind of get a better community assessment of everything operating.
For sure. Um, Here's a question that we got. How do you ensure that coordination through KeeperDAO will be more profitable for keepers than in the wild, especially if volume stays flat, which we don't expect? But
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'd say when comparing KeeperDAO versus the wild, these are separate opportunities, right? So I think that's important to note, is that a keeper can do both. So you don't have to necessarily choose one or the other. But yeah, we don't anticipate volume staying flat, right? That's the reason why we're onboarding market makers and increasing efficiency, through a new protocol and that sort of thing. So our primary focus, especially now that architecture is alive and on production staging and on path for just full on production. Our focus really is making sure the trading experience is as good as it possibly can be and as efficient as it possibly can be, and getting market makers on board too, and the integration partners on board too. And even if you look at like DAO partnerships, for example, somebody using like a multi-sig to kind of execute their trade, through their DAO, through KeeperDAO, like that. Those things are going to be super, super valuable to have in the ecosystem, and they're going to drive a lot of volume and attention.
awesome. All right, so here's the last of the kind of pre-written questions. So, Hazard and a community member were talking about, what are the advantages of KeeperDAO in the coordination game over just your 0x RFQ system.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the 0x RFQ system is a system where you're reaching out to market makers and they're saying, "Hey, here's the price I can offer. Here's the price I can offer." Or I'm sorry, in many cases, I guess it depends. If you're looking at like a market, or right, you have market makers bidding with you various prices, right? And so then the DEX or the service will kind of choose the best price for you, and then you'll execute the trade, and it includes a backup path, maybe based on your slippage, that sort of a thing. So these systems are very complex, and comparing them, there's definitely a lot of complexities there. So maybe comparing these two things on an audio call without like maybe drawing on a whiteboard or some visual assets, it's definitely difficult to do. but it's kind of similar in a regard where you have people bidding, right? So there's a lot of similarities because in the case of RFQ, you have market makers bidding, and then you also, like 0x RFQ, they have dexes that are integrated as well that are kind of bidding. They're bidding the dexes on their behalf essentially too. So it's very similar in that regard. But what 0x RFQ does not do is if your trade gets sandwiched or front run, or somehow it is used to have MEV extracted from it, you don't see a penny of that. That all goes to the miners or to the keeper, or well, there's no keeper in this case because this is 0x RFQ, the bot. So this would be an external bot running in the wild. So that profit doesn't go to you. So you don't get backstopped. So and I know I hear people saying, oh well, there's no slippage. Well, you can your trade can still get used to create MEV. And an example would be, say if you used 0x RFQ, that transaction could get routed through Uniswap. And it's going to get routed through Uniswap with some kind of parameter set. That parameter could be used against you, or somebody could tailgate your Uniswap transaction. And if someone's going to tailgate it, or if someone's going to use a slippage value against you, it may as well be someone doing it for you on your behalf. And that's what you get within the KeeperDAO ecosystem, right? So you still have a bidding mechanism, and you still have efficiencies through selecting the highest bidder, but also preventing grim triggers. But then if there's any attack, it's actually someone attacking you on your behalf. It's like, here, kind of like the grandma crossing the street. It's like, only instead of attacking the grandma, it's like they kind of pick her up and they run her across, and they save her time and put that time back in her pocket. That sort of a situation. So but again, I think this would be easier to compare with maybe some visual assets, and that's something we would like to do. There was a question earlier about like comparing with competitors. I think there's a lot of good things that we can do with directly comparing with competitors too. But we do want to let things mature just a little bit more before we start making those direct comparisons.
Awesome. So Joe, we're coming up on an hour here. I'd love if take like probably 10 more minutes and just grab some of the questions that we couldn't get to from the community. So what I'd like to do is, if you've got a question now, raise your hand. I'm going to pull you up on stage. I'm going to have you ask your question, and then we'll boot you off the stage again. We'll get Jay-Z to answer. We're just going to try and get a couple more questions answered because I know that folks are excited about this. And so why don't I start with Mr. Motivation here? He's had his hand up for a minute. So I'm going to call you up, and why don't you hop up on stage and ask your question.
Hey, can you talk about the pilot program rewards and like if they're going to be subject to lockups or not?
Yeah. Hey, Deets, do you happen to have that doc in front of you? I can find it, but it might take me a minute.
Yeah, I'm doing the same thing right now.
Okay, we'll both dig and we'll race and see who gets there first.
Yeah, I've got it up right in front of me. So
Perfect.
On the Rook that you're earning, there is going to be a vesting period of 6 months. So what's going to happen is that we talked about that weekly leaderboard of that pool that market makers are going to be competing for. So from that pool is kind of how we're going to be handing out individual compensation for folks participating in the pilot program. So what's going to happen is that on a weekly basis, we're going to take the sum of all of their Rook bid earned off of their orders. So let's say that this market maker had, easy numbers, 1,000 orders filled that netted them, let's just easy numbers here. Yeah, 150 Rook in orders for that week. But for all the market makers participating in the program, there was 500 Rook. Well, they will be getting 30% of that week's rewards because it's that direct ratio of the total amount of Rook bids that they won compared to the total amount of Rook bids from all the participants. And so from that, they'll be getting 30% of that pool that then will be set aside for them, that will be available to them starting 6 months after the start of the program. And then we're not going to just full on, just hand over a lump sum to folks. That will be streamed to them over a period of time as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're not making the same scenario that we had with the trade mining on the old HG setup.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, this was iterated with those kind of understandings in mind, was that you're going to accumulate some solid compensation from this, but we're going to drip it to you slowly, and there's going to be a lockup period as well.
Nice.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for hopping up for the question. It looks like, hey, Arbinit, I'm going to call well for a question. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks guys for doing this. So thanks for asking my question as well before about kind of 0x RFQ model. So Jay-Z, we can talk offline about this one, but to rephrase it and not even compare it to 0x RFQ exactly, what's the decision making of why you may want to pay out in Rook as opposed to just saying, hey, keepers, give me the best price on the asset that the person wants to buy or sell, and just give them the best price, and like don't even insert kind of Rook into the equation. Obviously you need it for something like tokenomics, but what's the benefit there?
Yeah, great question. And this discussion plays a lot into the protocol upgrade that we're currently working on, because there are different paths you can go down, right? And I think the Rook factor that's playing into it really stems from the fact that you need to have control of tokenomics in the ecosystem, right? So because we want to have a burn, we want to have keepers who are getting paid for their actions. Now there are different ways to pay for the actions, right? So there are a variety of different ways. There are a variety of different pros and cons. And what's funny is we actually just had a meeting about this morning too, to kind of resurface some of these different scenarios. And there's a lot of different ways that keepers can interact with this. And our protocol upgrade is going to kind of bring this, full front. And so if you look at limit orders, capturing arbitrage on a limit order can be awkward sometimes, because you can capture it in a quote token, a base token. If it's like a 3-leg trade, it can be captured in like a middle token sometimes, just depending on the protocol that you're integrating with. So it does get very awkward. And really, at the end of the day, like you want to give keepers flexibility, but then it also depends too on, is this a limit order? Is this a market order / instant order? What's the expectation there? And so today things are kind of based on limit orders, since that's the current functionality. But with the protocol upgrade, and then that leading to market type orders, there's definitely more of a desire to have the output token be the maximized factor there. But that being said, the token economics is critical, to kind of have that flywheel. We want to be able to control an asset that can potentially be deflationary with a burn based on volume going through the system, and maybe distributing to various people, whether it's the user, the keeper, the XRook stakers, or the burn, for example. So there's definitely a lot of factors that play into it, but it is important to, if you want to maintain your own ecosystem, to factor that in so that you can apply, like, say, the burn, for example.
Got it. Okay, yeah. Because I guess the question was like, what is the non-tokenomic reason? Because like Hazard and I were talking about this, and the only one I could think through of like why this is actually better is before the actual tokenomics. Because otherwise, like I think just giving, because like the fact that a limit order is like priced, it's a marketable limit order, right? Like in the regular stock market, if you place a marketable limit order, you don't get filled there. You get filled at a better price than that, right? So the concept would be exactly the same. It's like, okay, I'm selling something down 5%, but like you can get filled down 3%, so we're just going to do that for you. That's conceptually the same thing as a keeper, filling you down 5%, but then paying you the 2% in Rook. But like the benefit there is obviously like yes, this is a mechanism of inserting tokenomics, which, to be fair, I think 0x has actually had trouble like creating the tokenomics model for their token. So like maybe this is ultimately what you arrive at. So I'm if tokenomics is the answer, like I'm roughly okay with that. If you don't mind, I'll ask one more unrelated question.
Yeah, go for it.
So you mentioned these market makers that were onboarding. So when I was thinking through like market making on chain, I imagine if you're like a DEX market maker, I imagine like that's kind of challenging to do it without limit orders on most of these platforms, right? Like Uniswap and these sort of things. So like if you're just a traditional market maker on something like Coinbase, that's a lot more trivial because you have like, limit orders are spread throughout the book, and that's like traditional market making. So are the people that were onboarding actually like market makers who just like straight up don't even know how to market make in this DEX world, and now this is like an ability for them to do it, and to your point, get kind of the kickbacks on MEV?
Were you asking if they do or don't have experience on DEXs? I missed the question and all that.
Yeah, like these market makers that are onboarding, are these like mainly like traditional market makers on
So
centralized exchanges?
this program is basically catering to the folks who have experience, and preferably experience actually, on chain, right?
Interesting.
I don't think any of our current candidates do not have it. So let me reword that so it's not confusing. All of our current candidates have experience market making on chain to some degree, or if they're the type of candidate who is market making, like say on centralized exchanges, but not market making on chain, then they have many trading strategies that are on chain. Just none of them might be market making, but I believe most of them are market making on chain, one protocol or another. And some of them, I believe, might even just be doing like maybe more recent protocols. Like there's not very many of them that have been marketing on chain for like 4 years. Most of them are somewhat recent. So like some of the newer protocols.
But like, what does that even mean to be like market making per se on like something like Uniswap? Like you're just providing liquidity to
Oh,
these LPs.
I don't mean market making on Uniswap. I'd say like
Yeah,
DYDX for example, or
yeah,
0x for example.
right. It can only really be places that have some notion of an order book, right? Like, or like limit orders, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah, which is not like a big surface area potentially, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Most folks, like you said, when they think of DEX, they kind of provide liquidity somewhere, like, or yield farming. That's what the majority of folks do.
exactly. Yeah. So the crux of my question, I guess, is like, yeah, a combination of like centralized exchange market making and the like couple places that you can even do decentralized market making. But now this gives them some path to market make on other things. So do you like think like I have like no sense at all with these market makers, like what sort of like MEV sort of like liquidity there actually is. So like when they put a limit order and like it actually happens to, they don't know, but it actually is like capturing some MEV opportunity. Like, do you have any sense of like what this market size actually is? Like, is there a way to gauge this? We
So
do it.
I don't have any numbers in front of me, but I personally have been doing this with Volley Fire for years, and it is very lucrative. I think what's interesting about that is that's essentially like my I'd say side hustle at this point, because obviously I'm focusing full time on KeeperDAO. So like if someone were to focus full time on it, it should in theory be much more successful than mine, but it's already very lucrative. Because it's kind of like the way I like to describe it is it's kind of like, hey, go arbitrage this for me. It's kind of like you're kind of like a taker, but you're a gasless taker. You're really a maker, but at the end of the day, it kind of acts like a taker because you integrate with one protocol and it just kind of goes out and just does whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes something will cross you with Uniswap. Other times something will cross you with something else. And then now that the coordination game is live, as soon as we get a keeper integrated with centralized exchanges, they can just cross you with other centralized exchanges, even if you're not integrated with one. And it's kind of like, imagine if you say, like, maybe you remember back in the day when like the Korean exchanges would be like 10% off from the rest of the world, and everyone's sitting there like, oh, I wish I could arbitrage that. It's like, well, here, you don't even need KYC and you can get arbitraged against the Korean exchanges. You know what I mean? Just
Right.
that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I guess my question was like, do you have any sense of what the volume is like gonna be for the hiding game based on this?
Yeah,
or
and
is it?
that's a great question. I don't have any numbers on me at the moment, unfortunately.
Yeah, because like with gas this high these days, like it wouldn't surprise me if it's a low number, but it also wouldn't
Right,
surprise me that much if it's like I straight up don't know if it's $10 million a day or $100 million a day or $1 billion a day. I'd probably say
right.
somewhere between 100, but like I have no intuition on this, and maybe we
Yeah,
don't
and
know until we do it.
that's a great question. But I also think that's one of those things where um sometimes like sitting back and trying to analyze the number is one thing, but just going and doing it is a
Yeah,
total other thing too. Because
totally
like
agree.
different
Yeah,
people have different strategies, and it's like trying to like assess the market and get an idea. If you just have like a bunch of people throwing a bunch of different strategies at the wall, like you'll just discover it sometimes way easier than trying to guess it. So
yeah,
it's
definitely.
definitely important to get a variety of strategies in there. But gas prices do play a factor in volume for sure. But what's interesting about it is like sometimes like because gas prices like I found like when they creep up, it affects it negatively. But when like some event happens, like say a cascading liquidations,
Yeah,
that just MEV just goes absolutely insane. And
right.
so then it's like even if gas prices are 600 G way, if you've got cascading liquidations, like it's a gold mine.
Yeah. We just need to figure out how to get those liquidation partners. But yeah, I agree. Awesome. All right, I don't want to take up too much time, but thanks for the time, guys. Appreciate it. And Jay Z maybe can chat a little bit more offline on some of the other stuff. But this has been great.
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions.
Hey, Arb, thanks for hopping up on here. Appreciate it. One question I wanted to ask you, Jay Z, and it's something that I guess kind of surfaces now and again throughout the community, and people ask as well, is kind of what's the future of the whitelist for tokens in the hiding game? Kind of what's the future of what happens there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think that the future of it has gotten historically kind of punted down the road, waiting for the coordination game. Um, and so now that the coordination game is here, it's like we do need to future proof that because in a perfect world, you want to be able to dynamically add a token at any given moment. Like a user should be able to say, "Hey, this random shitcoin was just minted. I want to swap it." And then but in order to do that, what's interesting is you need a lot of infrastructure in order to do that, right? So what you need is you need a front end that sends a message somewhere that then relays that to keepers and says, hey, someone's interested in trading this brand new shitcoin that was just minted 5 minutes ago. Is anyone open for this task? And so it's like what we need to build that mechanism that kind of relays that information. And that's not something we're asking keepers to do today. But that is something we would like to ask keepers to do, in the future. Now, is that next month? Probably not. Is that later this year? Absolutely, I would like to do that. But we also don't want to necessarily put an expectation on that, like as far as a time frame, just because there's a lot of really important things we want to get done first, and then that's going to be one of the next really important things because obviously like when there's a new asset out, whether it's an airdrop or something else, like people want to swap that, and that's it's very common use case, right? And so we definitely want to solve that. So I would love to solve that this year, but I don't want to put like we'll get that in Q2 or Q3. I don't want to put a time on that just yet. So basically the way this will kind of play out is we want to get the first wave of keepers in there comfortable, happy operating, and just immediately start onboarding, another wave of keepers, and then we start opening up these dialogues. Hey, keepers, what do you think if we do this? What would you think? How would you react? Do you like in order to add new tokens? Do you need to reboot your bot, or can you dynamically add new tokens? And we might have one keeper that says, "Oh yeah, I can dynamically add them," and we might have two other keepers that say, "No, actually, I need to reboot my bot." And so then we have to have this discussion of, well, hey, what if we add this feature, and then if you can't add new tokens dynamically, then I guess you're going to be missing out on profit. So it actually incentivizes you to dynamically be able to support dynamically added new tokens. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, okay, I guess I have to add a feature so that I don't have to reboot my bot. And then it's kind of like incentivizing keepers to add a new feature because they'll make more money if they do, right? And that's one of the beauties of the coordination game is as long as the feature leads to keepers making more money and getting more volume, they're going to do it without the shadow of a doubt. And it's just a matter of making sure that feature makes sense for them and isn't isn't an impossible task. Because like if we ask them to support dynamically adding new tokens, and it doesn't make them more money, and it's like a month worth of work, they might not do it. But if it does make them more money and it is a month worth of work, they're still going to do it. So it's just one of those sorts of situations.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, really good answer there. It was not something that I had the answer to, so I appreciate you digging into that. Let's just take one more. We're a little over, but that's fine. Motivation. I'll give you one more shot. Why don't you hop on up and ask the last question of the call? Minor. You still here, bud? Okay. Well, I'm just going to grab one more question from the text list instead. So, do we know if any of our keepers are already operating on other chains?
So I guess other blockchains is what they mean, right?
Yeah.
I'd say the answer is yes, but I try not to like pry too much into super details, so I don't know. Like, and I'm assuming what this question is leading to is when will the coordination game support other chains? And so the answer is yes, but I don't know when the coordination game will support other chains. Because I'm assuming that's the direction of the question, which is a very good question.
For sure. All right, we're going to do one last question. Nothing to one. I just invited you to the stage if you want to accept that and come on up. You got your hand raised. Oh, let's try that again. All right, go on ahead.
Thank you. I guess everything sounds great, and just in the spirit of balancing things out, what are you worried about, and how are you trying to compensate for those worries as far as what the weaknesses might be in the product?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do appreciate balancing things out. It makes sense, and it also makes for a more entertaining call. So worries, right? So I guess one obvious worry would be something that was already previously mentioned about, someone brought up the idea of, well, if usage in the hiding book plateaus, what does that mean for the product, right? And so, and obviously that's something that is fundamental, right? So we're spending a lot of time and effort kind of setting things up so that it becomes natural for there to be a lot of volume and activity, right? Because that's critical. You can have the best product in the world and the best engineering in the world, and the best UI in the world and the coolest graphic with the coolest logo, but if you don't have liquidity flowing through, then you're a dud, right? And so that's why we're spending a lot of manpower and a lot of time, on market makers, on making sure our protocol upgrade goes through and gives us every efficiency advantage that we could possibly get. And so that's absolutely critical. I wonder if there's another one, because obviously that one was discussed a bit already. I'd say, like a little, concern I have would be kind of like what I was describing before about asking things of keepers, where it's like, in theory, if you can show a keeper that adding a new feature will make money, in theory, they will do it. But what's interesting is in practice, that's not always the case, just because, there's so few good keepers, I should say, so few good bot operators in the world, because the ones that are good are so busy and have high opportunity costs, right? And so, it's like, how do you make sure that, if we want keepers to add a feature, say dynamically supporting new tokens that are just added on a whim, if we want keepers to add that feature, how do we get across to them that this will be worth it? And if it's kind of borderline worth it, how do we push that over the edge? And really, at the end of the day, the answer is kind of comes back to driving more use, driving more liquidity, driving more volume. And that kind of, again, it all starts with partners with integrations. It all starts with market makers and users and the protocol upgrade and making sure that our app is sharp, crisp, and users are getting the best experience possible. And so if we kind of focus on that and nail that, the trickle down effect to everything else is absolutely massive. And so that's absolutely key. And that right there, if we can knock that out of the park, that like eases all concerns everywhere.
Yeah, what a great way to wrap up the call. I really appreciate you asking that. Nothing to one. Appreciate it. But that's, we're quite a bit over. So I'm going to go on ahead and wrap up here and just say, Jay-Z, thanks again for taking the time today, for sharing. I know everyone here is super excited to see the rest of the development continue. So let's get you back to work. No,
Absolutely.
This has been great. All of the community questions have been awesome. Really appreciate you guys. I mean, the thought behind them is fantastic. You guys obviously have done your homework. So really appreciate that. We're just going to close with just a few quick updates. If you haven't seen it yet, check out the open roles board that we have. We're hiring up. We have some fantastic positions available, and very, very market competitive compensation. So please do check that out. Or if you have friends that are looking to get into Web3, or folks that are just really high performing employees, we're looking to talk to people. So send them our way. Really excited to already be seeing a lot of great candidates coming in through the jobs board as well. So stay tuned for more of that. As we are able to get through the large number of applicants, and we start hiring some folks up, we'll make some cool announcements around that as well. Another thing, just if you didn't catch it, the B protocol and us teaming up for that BAMM backstop. Go check out that proposal as well. Really excited to be working with them, and really good folks there. And speaking of that, we'll be co-hosting an event with them at ETH Denver. So if you guys are going to ETH Denver, would love to meet you. I've got some swag I'm giving away there. We're going to be talking with developers, talking with other protocols. I'm really excited to be boots on the ground there. So if you are going there, want to get to our event, or you want to meet up and introduce yourselves or anything like that, send me a DM. I'll be at ETH Denver for pretty much the whole show there. Also, we had KIP 13 that passed voting as well. More details will be coming out on execution of that up to $4 million allocation for purchasing Rook off the market. That's something that we'll have some more information coming out there. And then the last thing is that we'll have another one of these community calls next week. So it'll start again at 6 p.m. UTC or 1 p.m. Eastern time. And we'll have Mark from Bancor on, and really excited to talk with him about our current integrations with them, about I think Bancor 3 is on its way, and hopefully Mark gets to talk about that with us as well, and ways that we can continue to work together. So really excited for that call next week. We have actually a number of folks that we're lining up for community calls. So really excited to continue to bring folks on and talk with them in front of the community here. But yeah, so that's going to kind of bring today's call to a close. So again, thank you all for joining. If you've got more questions, we'll try and get to some of them in that KDCC-CG channel. So if you've got more questions that we didn't get to today, go on ahead and write more there, and we'll try and get to answer a few more of those. But again, thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next time. Signing off. This is What's the Deets, and another KDCC in the books. Thank you all again. Thank you, Jay-Z, and we'll talk to you again soon. See you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.